The girl's name was Zara. 19. Quiet. Invisible. Her father had married again after her mother died of illness. 6 months later, he died in a construction accident. The house transferred legally to her stepmother, Diane Mercer. And that's when the mask dropped. Diane didn't look evil. She wore pressed blouses, attended church, volunteered at local charity drives, posted Bible verses online. Inside the house, she ran it like a prison. Locked fridge after 9 p.m., security cameras in the kitchen, phone confiscated, school withdrawn for mental health, bruises explained as clumsiness. Neighbors told Zara was unstable. She called Zara burden, useless, broken. And every time Zara tried to speak, Diane would lean close and whisper, "No one believes girls like you." For 2 years, that became law. The security camera above the fridge wasn't Diane's idea. It belonged to someone else. 3 weeks earlier, a Korean Mafia syndicate had started monitoring the house, not because of Zara, but because Diane's late husband had laundered money through a construction contract. The syndicate leader wanted proof of hidden assets. That leader was Ji-hoon Kong. Ji-hoon Kong did not raise his voice. Men leaned in to hear him. He was in his late 30s, sharp suits, scar on his jaw, eyes that never blinked fast. 10 years earlier, his younger sister had died in an accident. Everyone said it was suicide. He knew it wasn't. She had been abused by a teacher. No one believed her. She stopped speaking before she stopped breathing. Since then, Ji-hoon had one rule. He did not interfere in domestic matters, but he never ignored the sound of someone drowning. The bleach bucket, the dog bowl, the timer counting down. He replayed the footage 3 times, then muted the room. "Who owns this house?" he asked calmly. An associate answered, "Her stepmother." Ji-hoon leaned back. "Find out who believes her." He didn't storm the house. He investigated. The police officer who dismissed the prior complaint had gambling debt. The pastor praising Diane was receiving donations. The neighbor who called Zara unstable owed Diane money. The school counselor who withdrew her had signed an NDA. Diane had built a reputation shield. Ji-hoon studied patterns. He watched Zara's body language in the footage, flinching, rib guarding, hair thinning, hands trembling. He zoomed in on dinner plates, separate gravy bowl. His jaw tightened. "Test the drains," he ordered. 2 days later, his men retrieved residue from the plumbing traps. Arsenic. Low dose, long-term exposure. Ji-hoon closed his eyes for a full 5 seconds. When he opened them, something had changed. "Prepare the car." He didn't break in, he knocked. Diane opened the door. She smiled. Ji-hoon didn't. "I'm here regarding your late husband's construction debts." Her smile faltered. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I believe you do." He stepped inside without asking permission. Zara stood in the kitchen, eyes down, shoulders curved inward. He saw the tremor in her fingers. He did not look at Diane when he spoke. "You can leave the room." Diane laughed. "This is my house." Ji-hoon's associate locked the front door behind them. The laughter stopped. Ji-hoon crouched slightly to Zara's eye level, 10 feet away, not touching. "Are you sick?" he asked quietly. Zara didn't answer. Diane interjected. "She has anxiety." Ji-hoon didn't blink. "I didn't ask you." Silence. He held eye contact with Zara, not forceful, not soft, steady. "You don't have to protect her," he said. That sentence cracked something inside Zara. Diane tried to regain control. "She's unstable." Ji-hoon stood. And you're poisoning her. The word landed like a gunshot. Diane froze. You're insane. Ji-hoon pulled a small evidence bag from his coat. Lab report, arsenic traces. Zara's knees almost buckled. Poison. It wasn't weakness, it wasn't anxiety, it wasn't imagination. Ji-hoon looked at her again. You didn't deserve that. Her breathing shattered, 2 years of silence collapsed. She says I'm crazy, Zara whispered. Do you believe her? He asked. She shook her head for the first time. Number. Ji-hoon turned to Diane. You will pack a bag. For what? For the hospital. And after that? He didn't raise his voice. For prison. Diane tried the law card. I'll call the police. They're already outside, Ji-hoon replied calmly. He had tipped them off anonymously, provided lab evidence, financial corruption proof, insurance fraud documents. Diane's shield dissolved. No yelling, no violence, just systematic dismantling. As police escorted her out, she hissed at Zara. You'll crawl back. Zara flinched. Ji-hoon stepped forward, not aggressively, just enough to block that line of sight. She won't. It wasn't loud. It was final. The doctor confirmed chronic arsenic poisoning, hair thinning, neurological tremors, organ stress. Treatable because it was caught in time. Zara sat in the hospital bed, IV in her arm. Ji-hoon stood by the window. You don't have to stay, she said quietly. I know. Why are you... He took a long pause. My sister asked for help once. Silence. I wasn't there. That was the only explanation he gave. Zara swallowed. You're here now. He nodded once. Weeks later, Zara walked out of the hospital stronger. Diane awaited trial. The pastor resigned. The officer was investigated. Ji-hoon stood beside his black sedan. You're free, he said. Zara looked at him. What happens to people who hurt others like that? Ji-hoon's expression didn't change. They learn. He opened the car door for her, not as possession, as protection. And somewhere deep inside the man who ruled an empire of fear, a wound he carried for 10 years, closed, just a little. The girl's name was Zara, 19, quiet, invisible. Her father had married again after her mother died of cancer when Zara was 11. The new wife was a woman named Diane Mercer, blonde bob, blue eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled, pressed blouses and pearl earrings, and a voice like warm honey poured over broken glass. She handled payroll at the construction company where Curtis Thompson worked 6 days a week. She brought homemade lasagna to the house. She told Zara her braids were beautiful. She quoted scripture at dinner and held hands during grace. 6 months after the wedding, Curtis died in a construction accident. A beam collapsed on a commercial site downtown. They told Zara he didn't suffer, but she didn't believe them, because people only say that when the suffering was too terrible to describe. The house transferred legally to Diane Mercer. Curtis hadn't updated his will after the marriage. Diane's name was on the deed. Zara had nothing but her bedroom and her father's last name. And that's when the mask dropped. Diane didn't look evil. That was the architecture of it. She wore pressed blouses, attended Grace Fellowship Church every Sunday morning, always in the second pew, always with her Bible open to whichever passage Pastor Holloway was preaching from. Volunteered at local charity drives, organized the annual canned food collection, posted Bible verses on her social media with captions about gratitude and God's grace and the quiet heroism of stepmothers. The neighbors called her a blessing. The pastor called her a servant of the Lord. The churchwomen brought casseroles to the house for a month after Curtis died and told Diane she was doing God's work taking care of that poor girl. Inside the house, she ran it like a prison. The first month after Curtis died, Diane kept the performance going full time. Gentle voice, soft touches, meals together at the dining table. She even let Zara cry without comment, which felt generous until Zara realized it was strategic. Diane was waiting, measuring the gap between Curtis's death and the point where no one would check on them anymore. The casserole stopped coming at week 3. The phone calls slowed by week 5. The neighbors stopped ringing the doorbell by month 2. And the day the last churchwoman stopped asking how they were doing, something in Diane's face shifted. Not dramatically, just a settling. The way a building settles when the foundation is done and the scaffolding comes down. Locked fridge after 9 at night. A steel clasp drilled directly into the refrigerator door with a combination padlock hanging from it. Diane told Dr. Wendt at the free clinic that Zara had an eating disorder. Zara didn't have an eating disorder, but Diane had already written it in a file, and Dr. Wendt had already believed it, and the padlock stayed. Security cameras in the kitchen. Small white units mounted in the hallway and above the back door. Not Zara's bedroom. Diane was careful about that. She needed the cameras to look like concern, not control. If anyone asked, and they never did, Diane would explain that Zara had night terrors and wandered the house in dangerous states. Zara didn't have night terrors, but Diane had already told Pastor Holloway that she did, and Pastor Holloway had already told the congregation. And the congregation had already started praying for that poor girl with the dead father and the eating disorder and the night terrors, whose stepmother was a saint for taking care of her. Phone confiscated. School withdrawn for mental health. Diane had forged a homeschool declaration that required no follow-up in the state of Illinois. There was no homeschooling. There was cleaning, cooking, laundry, yard work, and silence. Bruises explained as clumsiness. The first time Diane grabbed Zara's arm hard enough to leave marks, she stood in the bathroom afterward and practiced what she would say if anyone noticed. Fell on the stairs. Bumped into the door frame. Clumsy girl. The neighbors saw the bruises the way people see weather. They noted it. They moved on. Now, if you're new here, welcome to Afro-Korean Narratives. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button and tap the bell so you don't miss what happens next. Trust me, this story is going to take you somewhere you won't expect. Drop your location in the comments. Let's see where our family is watching from today. Now, let's get back to Zara. Diane called her burden. She said it the way someone says a fact. Not with heat, not with cruelty that anyone outside the house would recognize. She said it the way you'd say a measurement or a weather report. Matter of fact. Settled. Useless. She said that one when Zara moved too slowly. When the kitchen floor wasn't clean enough. When dinner wasn't ready by 6:15 exactly. Broken. That was the worst one, because it came on the quiet nights when Diane was tired and her mask slipped lower than usual. She'd stand in the doorway of Zara's bedroom, arms crossed over her lavender cardigan, and study Zara the way a person studies something they own. You're broken, Zara. You know that, right? Your mama was sick and she passed it to you. Your daddy couldn't fix it. I can't fix it. Nobody can fix broken. And every time Zara tried to speak, every time she opened her mouth to push back or defend herself or simply say no, Diane would lean close and whisper the same 6 words. No one believes girls like you. For 2 years, that became law. Not because it was true, but because truth and repetition look the same when no one else is in the room. Diane said it so many times that the words burrowed into Zara's chest like seeds planted in dark soil. They grew roots. they wrapped around things. And some mornings, waking up in a locked bedroom in her dead father's house, with bleach burns on her fingers and hunger sitting in her stomach like a stone, Zara almost believed them. Almost. Because before the cage, there had been light. Zara remembered it in pieces. Her father making pancakes shaped like animals on Sunday mornings while she pretended she was too old to care. His calloused hands braiding her hair badly for school. The sound of his laugh shaking the furniture. The two-bedroom house in Westbrook with the yellow kitchen her mother had painted herself, 8 months pregnant, standing on a stepstool while Curtis begged her to get down. Her mother died when Zara was 11. After that, it was Curtis and Zara against the world. He burned dinner 3 nights a week and ordered pizza the other 4. He wasn't perfect, but he was present, and presence was the only currency that mattered. Then Diane arrived, like weather, and within 14 months, she'd moved in, married Curtis in a courthouse ceremony Zara wasn't told about until after, and gotten her name on the deed. Now the yellow kitchen had been repainted gray. The family photos were in a box in the garage, and Zara was sleeping in a room her mother had decorated, behind a door that locked from the outside, in a house that used to be hers. Somewhere beneath the exhaustion and the pain and the silence, somewhere behind her sternum where her father's voice used to live, a small coal still burned. Not a flame, not yet, just heat, just enough to keep her from going completely cold. She didn't know it yet, but that coal was the only reason she was still alive, and someone else was about to notice. Zara learned the rules fast because the consequences were faster. The kitchen timer controlled everything. Diane would set it on the counter before assigning a task. Scrub the grout, 30 minutes. Mop the hallway, 15. Clean the oven, 45. If the timer went off and the task wasn't done, whatever food had been set aside for Zara went in the trash. Not the next meal, that meal. The one she could see sitting on the card table by the back door. The one she could smell from across the kitchen. Gone while she watched. Diane ate at the dining table. The oak table Curtis had built with his own hands the summer before he met Diane, the one with the scratch on the corner, where Zara had dropped a toy when she was 6 and her mother had laughed instead of scolding her. Diane covered the scratch with a placemat. She set the table every night with cloth napkins and real silverware and candles that smelled like vanilla. Zara ate at a fold-out card table by the back door, on a paper plate, with a plastic fork. The card table wobbled on one leg. Diane never fixed it. Zara suspected that was intentional. Everything in this house was intentional. When Diane had guests, which was often, Zara ate in her room, on the floor, because Diane had removed the desk and chair 2 months after Curtis died, explaining to anyone who asked that Zara had hurt herself with the furniture during an episode. There were no episodes, but the furniture was still gone. Sundays were performance days. Diane drove them both to Grace Fellowship Church in the silver Lexus she'd bought with Curtis's life insurance payout. Zara sat in the second pew, wearing clothes Diane picked out, clean and pressed and modest, and she smiled when Diane's hand landed on her shoulder because the eyes of the congregation were everywhere, watching, approving, seeing exactly what Diane wanted them to see. Diane, you are doing God's work with that girl. It's not easy, Pastor Holloway. She fights me every step, but I love her like my own. The lies were so smooth they sounded like scripture. After church, the smile slid off Diane's face before they reached the end of the block. She wouldn't speak to Zara for the rest of the day unless it was to assign a task. The warmth she performed in public never survived the front door. One Sunday after service, a woman named Mrs. Calloway from next door approached Zara in the parking lot. She was an older woman with kind eyes and a nervous habit of adjusting her glasses. The sun was high, and the parking lot smelled like asphalt and someone's perfume, and Zara could feel the bruise under her sleeve throbbing with each heartbeat. "Honey, are you okay? You look thin." Zara's mouth opened. For 1 second, one dangerous second, she almost told the truth. But before the first word could form, Diane's hand closed around her elbow. Not hard enough to leave a mark, hard enough to communicate. "She's been struggling with her appetite," Diane said, pulling Zara close in a gesture that looked like a hug, but felt like a vice. "Grief affects the body in such strange ways. We're working with her doctor on a meal plan." Mrs. Calloway nodded. She adjusted her glasses. She said she would keep praying for them. She didn't ask again. That was the system, not a person, not a single lie. A system. Diane had built it with the patience of an engineer, placing each piece exactly where it needed to go so that the entire structure held. Pastor Holloway received generous donations from Diane every month. Cash, not checks. The kind that doesn't leave a paper trail, but buys loyalty just the same. He praised Diane from the pulpit. He used words like sacrifice and devotion and calling. Officer Dale Kemper of the Westbrook Police Department had a gambling problem. 3 months after Curtis died, Diane had filed a domestic disturbance report, claiming Zara had become violent during an episode. Kemper arrived at the house. He saw a calm blonde woman in a cardigan and a trembling black girl in oversized clothes. He wrote in his report that the girl appeared agitated and the stepmother appeared composed. That report lived in a file now, and files have a way of becoming facts when no one questions them. The school counselor who processed Zara's withdrawal signed a non-disclosure agreement Diane had drafted. The NDA was meaningless legally, but the counselor didn't know that. She only knew that Diane Mercer had important friends and a lawyer's phone number on speed dial, and it was easier to sign the paper than ask questions about a girl who would probably drop out anyway. The church group met every Wednesday at the house. 12 women in the living room, eating lemon bars and studying the book of Proverbs, while Zara cleaned the upstairs bathroom on her hands and knees with a toothbrush. She could hear them through the floor, laughing, praising Diane, saying what a burden it must be, saying how strong she was, saying that girl should be grateful. Grateful. For the roof over her head that her mother had chosen. For the food she was barely allowed to touch. For the woman who had married her father for his house and his insurance, and then erased his daughter, piece by piece. One Wednesday, Zara came downstairs for water during Bible study. She didn't know the group was still there. She walked into the kitchen wearing a long-sleeved shirt to cover the bruise on her forearm. 12 women looked at her, the way they might look at a stain on a white tablecloth. "Zara, honey, we're in the middle of fellowship," Diane said. Her voice was warm enough to melt butter and sharp enough to draw blood. "I just needed water. There's water upstairs in the bathroom." 12 women watched. Not one of them offered Zara a glass of water. Not one said, "Sit down, join us, have a lemon bar." Not one asked why a 19-year-old girl in her own father's house had to ask permission to drink from her own kitchen. Zara went back upstairs. She drank from the bathroom faucet, cupping the water in her hands, and trying not to think about the 12 women below her who saw her and chose Diane. 12 witnesses. 0 help. She added their names to a list she kept in her head. Not a revenge list, a record. Because Zara's father had taught her that the truth doesn't disappear just because no one writes it down. It lives in the body, in the memory, in the quiet keeping of facts by people the world calls invisible. And Zara kept facts the way her father kept measurements on job sites, with precision, with repetition, with the quiet understanding that someday the numbers would matter. Lie number 1. Zara had an eating disorder. Told to Dr. Vent, Pastor Holloway, 3 neighbors. Supported by the fridge lock and Zara's thinning frame, which was actually caused by the fridge lock. Lie number 2. Night terrors and sleepwalking. Told to the congregation and the social worker named Ruth Phelps, who visited once and never returned. Supported by the cameras. Lie number 3. Voluntary school withdrawal due to grief. Told to everyone. In reality, Diane forged the paperwork. There was no homeschooling. There was servitude. Lie number 4. Zara was violent and unstable. Supported by Officer Kemper's report. A report written by a man with a gambling problem who owed favors to people who owed favors to Diane. 4 lies, 4 bricks, and each person who believed them was mortar. Zara was invisible, but she was still counting. The economic trap was elegant in its cruelty. Diane collected Curtis's death benefits. Social Security survivor benefits meant for Zara were redirected because Diane filed as primary caregiver. The house, paid off by life insurance, belonged to Diane free and clear. She rented the basement to a quiet man named Glenn, who paid cash and never looked Zara in the eye. Zara had nothing. No bank account because Diane had never helped her open one. No identification because Diane kept her birth certificate and Social Security card in a lockbox in the bedroom closet. No job because leaving the house required permission, and permission was never granted. She asked once, August, a part-time position at the grocery store on Elm Street. She'd seen a help wanted sign through the car window on the way to church. Honey, you can barely make it through the day without an episode. How would you hold down a job? The episode Diane referenced was Zara dropping a plate. 1 plate. Diane had written about it in a journal she kept in the kitchen drawer. She called it a care log. Every dropped item, every stumble, every raised voice. Dated, detailed. A paper trail that looked clinical and careful. That looked like a devoted stepmother monitoring a troubled young woman. It wasn't evidence of Zara's instability. It was evidence of Diane's planning. You can leave any time you want, Diane said, whenever the tension rose high enough to feel dangerous. She said it with a shrug, palms up, the picture of reasonableness. That was the most sophisticated lie of all. Because, technically, legally, Zara was an adult. She could walk out the front door anytime. But walk to where? With what money? With no phone, no ID, no car, no proof she was who she said she was. Freedom without resources isn't freedom. It's a different kind of cage with better lighting. And then the gravy started. Zara didn't eat with Diane, but every night Diane prepared a plate on the card table. The main course, a small portion of vegetables, and a separate bowl of gravy. The gravy was the only thing Diane made specifically for Zara. The girl likes gravy on everything, she told the Bible study group. It's the one thing that makes her eat. Zara did like gravy. It masked the taste of food she was too tired to chew. She poured it over everything. Drank it from the bowl on nights when the main course was withheld. She didn't know what was in it. The poisoning started slow. Not like in the movies. No bitter taste, no dramatic collapse. It began as fatigue. Deep, bone-heavy fatigue that settled into her body like wet concrete. She'd wake after 9 hours feeling like she hadn't slept at all. Her hands trembled when she held a mop. Her vision blurred by afternoon. Hair came loose in the shower drain in clumps that made her stomach fold. She thought it was depression. That's what Diane told her it was. Grief does that, Diane said one morning, watching Zara struggle to lift a laundry basket. Your body is processing trauma. Dr. Went said it's normal. Dr. Went hadn't said that. Zara hadn't seen Dr. Went since the first visit. But Diane used the doctor's name like a stamp of authority, pressing it into every conversation, to remind Zara that the medical system, like the church and the police and the neighbors, was on Diane's side. Her fingernails developed white horizontal lines. She noticed them while scrubbing the bathtub and held her hands up to the window light. The lines were faint but real. She didn't know the name for them. She just knew they hadn't been there 3 months ago. Her stomach hurt constantly. Not the sharp bite of hunger she'd grown used to, a deep, grinding ache that radiated outward. She vomited twice a week, sometimes more, always quietly into the toilet with the door closed because Diane charged her for messes, charged her chores. Vomit meant an extra hour of scrubbing. A dropped plate meant no dinner. A raised voice meant the bathroom faucet as her only water source for 2 days. The tremors worsened. Her hands shook so badly she cracked 3 glasses in 1 week. Each broken glass was a deduction. Each deduction, a meal lost. Each meal lost left her body with less fuel to fight whatever was eating her from the inside. Diane watched it happen with the patience of someone watering a plant. Not to make it grow, to make it wilt. On a Tuesday in October, Zara collapsed in the hallway. Her legs stopped working. 1 second she was carrying a mop bucket, the next she was on the floor in dirty water, staring at the ceiling, feeling her heart beat wrong. She counted. 4 minutes on the floor. Because counting was the only control she had left. Diane's footsteps arrived at minute 3. She stood over Zara the way someone stands over a spill. "What did you break?" "Nothing. I fell." "You fell or you tripped?" "My legs gave out." Diane's face wore something that wasn't concern, but had learned to dress like it. She looked at the water, the trembling hands, the bucket. "Clean it up. Then clean the hallway twice. You tracked dirty water on the baseboard." She walked away. Zara's hair was thinning. Her natural coils, the ones she used to wear in thick puffs and twists that took up the whole bathroom mirror, were falling out in patches. She pulled what remained into a tight bun. Not a style choice. A hiding place. The bun covered the bald spots. The bun told the world she was fine. Nobody looked long enough to question it. Her weight dropped. Not the way magazines celebrate, the way that makes clothes hang wrong and bones show where they shouldn't. Her collarbones pushed forward like handles. Her wrists belonged to a smaller, older woman. When she caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror, she didn't recognize the person looking back. Hollow-eyed, gray-skinned. She was disappearing. Not as a metaphor, as a medical fact. Something was disassembling her from the inside, cell by cell. And the only person who could explain what was happening was the person causing it. She started hiding bread, tearing corners from rolls during the narrow window between when Diane set out dinner and when she checked the plate. Pressing them flat, sliding them into her sock, eating them later in her room. Chewing slow and silent, making it last. One night, Diane found crumbs on the bedroom floor. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, lavender cardigan, face still as a painting. "I provide your meals, Zara, every night. If you're sneaking food, it means you're not being honest about your eating disorder." "I don't have an eating disorder." "Dr. Went's file says otherwise." "I'm hungry." "You just had dinner." "A bread roll." "And gravy." The word landed different this time. Zara felt her stomach turn. Not from hunger, from something she couldn't name yet. An instinct, the kind of knowing the body does before the mind catches up. Diane's eyes flickered. Not anger, satisfaction. The look of a woman who had pressed a button and received exactly the response she wanted. "We'll revisit your meal plan tomorrow. For tonight, you need rest." She closed the door. The bolt lock engaged from the outside. Zara lay in the dark, wide awake, her body aching, her hands trembling. And somewhere behind the exhaustion and the nausea and the hunger, that small coal in her chest pulsed once. Not a flame. Not yet. She was beginning to understand, in the slow, terrible way that truth arrives when every exit is blocked, that Diane Mercer was not keeping her alive. She was keeping her just barely alive enough to keep using. The security camera above the fridge wasn't Diane's idea. It belonged to someone else. 3 weeks before Zara collapsed in the hallway, a Korean Mafia syndicate had started monitoring the house on Maple Drive. Not because of Zara. They didn't know she existed. Not yet. The cameras had been tapped for an entirely different reason. One that had nothing to do with a 19-year-old girl eating bread from her sock, and everything to do with the dead man who used to own the house. Curtis Thompson had been a good man, but good men sometimes work for people who aren't. The construction company where Curtis spent the last decade of his life was partially funded through shell accounts controlled by Korean business interests in Chicago. Curtis didn't know. He showed up, swung hammers, collected checks. But the money that paid those checks had been washed through commercial contracts until it looked clean enough to deposit in any bank in Illinois. When Curtis died, the financial trail didn't die with him. Diane Mercer, who inherited everything, also inherited the paper trail. Bank statements, contractor invoices, a safety deposit box at First National that Curtis had been given as part of his employment and never opened. Diane opened it 2 weeks after the funeral. Whatever she found, she never mentioned to anyone, but someone noticed. The syndicate leader who noticed was Ji-Hoon Kong. Ji-Hoon Kong did not raise his voice. He had never needed to. Men leaned in to hear him, not because he whispered, but because the air around him demanded attention the way gravity demands falling. He was 38 years old, lean and precise in everything, from the way he knotted his tie to the way he ended conversations. Sharp jawline with a thin scar running from his right ear to the edge of his chin, a souvenir from a night in Busan he never discussed. Dark eyes that never blinked fast. Slicked back black hair. Tailored suits in charcoal and black, always. As if color were a concession he refused to make. He ran his operation from the back office of a Korean barbecue restaurant on West Lawrence Avenue. The restaurant was real. The food was excellent. The back office was soundproofed. From there, Ji-Hoon managed a network that moved money through construction, real estate, and import businesses across 3 states. He was not loud about it. He was not flashy. He was the kind of dangerous that didn't need to announce itself, because everyone in the room already knew. He had one rule that no one in his organization questioned, because the one man who had questioned it was no longer part of the organization. The rule was about women and children. You don't touch them. You don't use them. You don't threaten them. And if Ji-Hoon found out you had, the conversation that followed would be the last conversation you remembered clearly. The rule existed because of his sister. 10 years earlier, Ji-Hoon's younger sister, Soo-yeon, had died in what everyone called an accident. She was 17, quiet, a talent for drawing, and a laugh like wind chimes in a doorway. A teacher at her private academy in Seoul had been abusing her for 8 months. She told her mother. Her mother told the school. The school said Soo-yeon was confused, seeking attention. Girls her age sometimes imagine things. No one believed her. She stopped drawing. She stopped laughing. She stopped eating. On a Tuesday morning in March, she stopped breathing. Everyone called it suicide. Ji-Hoon flew back to Seoul and spent 3 days in his childhood bedroom, staring at walls covered in his sister's sketches. He knew it wasn't suicide. Not in the way the word is usually meant. She hadn't chosen to die. She had been killed. Slowly. By silence. By disbelief. by a system that looked at a girl asking for help and decided she was the problem. Since that day, Ji-hoon had one rule, and since that day, he had never ignored the sound of someone drowning. His associate, a wiry man named Dae-jung, with careful hands and a talent for digital surveillance, had tapped the cameras in the Maple Drive house to monitor Diane's movements. They wanted to know if she'd accessed the safety deposit box, if she was moving money, if she had any idea what her dead husband's construction contracts actually funded. What they found instead was Zara. Dae-jung brought the footage to Ji-hoon on a Thursday evening. He set a laptop on the desk between 2 glasses of soju and pressed play without commentary. He had learned that Ji-hoon preferred to form his own conclusions. The footage showed the kitchen, bright lighting, clean tile, a girl on her knees scrubbing grout while a timer counted down. She was thin, too thin. Her movements were slow and careful, the kind of careful that comes from pain. When the timer went off, a blonde woman entered, picked up a bread roll from a plate, took a bite, and threw the rest in the trash. Ji-hoon watched without expression. Next clip. The girl collapsing in the hallway, mop water spreading. She lay there for minutes. When the blonde woman appeared, she looked at the girl the way someone looks at a stain. Next. Dinner. The girl alone at a card table by the back door. Paper plate. Plastic fork. A bowl of gravy she drank because there was nothing else. 10 feet away, the blonde woman at the dining table with candles and cloth napkins. Next. The blonde woman standing in the girl's doorway, speaking. No audio. But Ji-hoon read body language the way most people read text. The girl's shoulders curved inward. Her hands gripped her shirt. Her head dropped with every word. Then the woman locked the door from the outside. Ji-hoon replayed the footage 3 times. The bleach bucket. The separate gravy bowl. The timer controlling food. The exterior bolt lock on a bedroom door. He muted the room. Who owns this house? He asked calmly. Dae-jung answered. The stepmother. Diane Mercer, she inherited it from the husband. And the girl? Stepdaughter, name is Zara Thompson. 19. Hasn't been seen outside the house in months. Pulled out of school last year, no phone. No social media. No employment records. Ji-hoon leaned back in his chair, the leather creaked. The restaurant noise filtered faintly through the soundproofing. Somewhere in the dining room, someone laughed. The sound felt obscene against what he had just watched. Find out who believes her, he said. Dae-jung paused. What do you mean? Find out if anyone in that girl's life has ever believed a single word she's said. The question wasn't rhetorical, it was diagnostic. Ji-hoon knew from his sister that abusers don't just hurt their victims, they build architecture around them. Walls made of lies and allies and systems that all point in the same direction, all saying the same thing. She's the problem. She's unstable. She's broken. The architecture is what makes the abuse possible, and the only way to dismantle it is to find the cracks. If anyone believed Zara, that was a crack. If no one did, that told Ji-hoon something worse. Dae-jung closed the laptop. What about the money, the construction accounts? Ji-hoon didn't answer for a long time. He stared at the wall where a framed photograph hung. An old picture. A girl with wind chime laughter sitting on a park bench in Seoul, sketchbook in her lap, looking at the camera like the world was still worth drawing. The money can wait, Ji-hoon said. Dae-jung nodded. He didn't ask why. He had been with Ji-hoon long enough to know that when the boss went quiet, the reason was always the same. Soo-yeon. It was always Soo-yeon. Ji-hoon didn't storm the house. He investigated. He spent 11 days building a complete picture of the system Diane Mercer had constructed around Zara Thompson, and what he found was so precisely engineered it reminded him of his own operations, which disturbed him more than the abuse itself. Because the abuse was cruelty, the system was craft. And craft meant planning. And planning meant Diane Mercer had sat down at some point, probably at her dining table, with her candles and her cloth napkins, and designed the cage brick by brick. He started with the police, Officer Dale Kemper, Westbrook PD, the man who had responded to Diane's domestic disturbance call, and written a report that painted Zara as agitated and Diane as composed. Ji-hoon had Dae-jung pull Kemper's financials. The results arrived in 48 hours. Kemper had a gambling problem. Specifically, he owed $14,000 to a sports betting operation run out of a bar on Cicero Avenue. The bar was owned by a man named Vince Gaeta, who happened to be the cousin of Diane Mercer's lawyer. The connection was thin enough to be deniable and strong enough to be useful. Kemper wasn't on Diane's payroll. He didn't need to be. He just needed to keep owing money to the right people and writing reports that favored the right women. Ji-hoon circled Kemper's name on the board, not with anger, with recognition. He knew how leverage worked. He used it himself every day. But there was a difference between leveraging a corrupt businessman and leveraging a cop to keep a teenager trapped in her own house. He moved to the church, Pastor Vernon Holloway, Grace Fellowship, the man who praised Diane from the pulpit every Sunday and used words like sacrifice and devotion and calling. Ji-hoon had Dae-jung trace the church's donation records. Diane gave generously, cash, monthly, no receipts requested. The amounts were inconsistent, which meant they weren't tithing. They were payments. The inconsistency was the tell. A tithe is a percentage. It follows income. Diane's donations spiked in the months after Curtis died, and again after the social worker's visit, and again after Mrs. Calloway asked Zara if she was okay in the parking lot. Every time someone got close to the truth, Diane increased the payment. Holloway wasn't a villain. Ji-hoon didn't think the man knew what was happening inside the house on Maple Drive. He was just a pastor with a congregation to feed and a building to maintain, and a donor who gave without asking for tax deductions. He chose not to look too closely, because looking closely might cost him the donation. And that kind of cowardice, the kind that wears a collar and quotes scripture while a girl drinks from a bathroom faucet, was the most common kind in the world. Ji-hoon circled Holloway's name. Next, the neighbor, Mrs. Calloway, the woman who had asked Zara if she was okay exactly once. Ji-hoon had Dae-jung check property records. Mrs. Calloway's house had a second mortgage. The lender was a private party. The private party was a trust managed by the same lawyer who represented Diane Mercer. Mrs. Calloway didn't owe Diane money directly, but she owed money to someone Diane controlled, and that was enough. One phone call from Diane's lawyer could trigger a review. One review could surface a missed payment. One missed payment could start a foreclosure. Mrs. Calloway wasn't ignoring Zara because she didn't care. She was ignoring Zara because she couldn't afford not to. Ji-hoon circled her name, but differently, with a line beneath it that meant something else in his system. It meant recoverable. Next, the school counselor. The woman who processed Zara's withdrawal had signed a non-disclosure agreement. The NDA was legally meaningless, but the counselor didn't know that. She only knew that Diane had powerful friends and a lawyer, and that asking questions about a quiet black girl with a dead father was not going to advance her career at a school that was already underfunded and understaffed. She signed the paper, she closed the file, she moved on to the next student. Ji-hoon didn't circle her name. He crossed it out. Some people are too deep in the system to be useful. The social worker, Ruth Phelps, visited once. Diane had prepared for her the way a stage director prepares for opening night. Fresh cookies, Zara in clean clothes, the house spotless and smelling like cinnamon. Ruth walked in, saw a beautiful home and a well-dressed stepmother and a quiet girl who wouldn't make eye contact, checked every box on her form, and left within 40 minutes. She never came back. Ji-hoon stared at the board. 5 names. 5 people who had been positioned, purchased, pressured, or persuaded to look the other way. A police officer, a pastor, a neighbor, a counselor, a social worker. 5 points on a perimeter. And in the center, locked behind a bolt on her bedroom door, a girl who was being erased. Then Ji-hoon did what Ji-hoon did best. He studied patterns. He spent 3 days watching footage of Zara. Not the dramatic moments, the small ones. The ones no one else would notice. He watched the way she flinched when a cabinet door closed too hard. He watched the way she guarded her ribs when she bent down, arms tucked tight against her sides, protecting something that had been hurt. He watched her hair thinning across the weeks of footage, the bun getting smaller, the scalp showing through. He watched her hands tremble when she lifted a glass. He watched her check the timer before she checked anything else in the room. He zoomed in on dinner plates, the separate gravy bowl. His jaw tightened. He had seen poisoning before. In his world, it was a tool, a crude one, messy, hard to control. But in a domestic setting, with a victim who had no access to medical care and no one to compare notes with, it was almost elegant. Low dose, long term. Symptoms that mimicked grief and depression, and the eating disorder that Diane had already planted in the medical file. "Test the drains," he ordered. Dae-jung looked up from his laptop. "The drains?" "Kitchen sink, bathroom sink, whatever she uses. Get samples from the plumbing traps." It took 2 days. Ji-hoon's men accessed the house during one of Diane's Wednesday Bible study meetings, entering through the basement where Glenn, the tenant, left the window unlocked because he smoked by it every evening. They pulled residue from the kitchen plumbing trap and the bathroom drain. The lab results came back on a Saturday. Arsenic. Low dose, consistent with chronic exposure over several months. The kind of dosage that doesn't kill fast. The kind that dismantles a body piece by piece. Hair loss, neurological tremors, organ stress, fatigue, nausea, white lines on the fingernails. Every symptom Zara had. Ji-hoon closed his eyes for a full 5 seconds. In 10 years of running an organization that operated outside the law, he had seen things that would break most people. He had made decisions that kept him awake at night, and decisions that let him sleep fine. And he knew the difference between the two. But this, a woman poisoning her stepdaughter, slowly, methodically, while the entire neighborhood praised her as a saint? This was a different category. When he opened his eyes, something had changed. Not in his face never changed, but in the room, the temperature of the air, the weight of the silence. Dae-jung noticed it the way animals notice a shift in atmospheric pressure before a storm. "Prepare the car," Ji-hoon said. He didn't break in, he knocked. 3 knocks, measured, even. The kind of knocking that communicates something before the door even opens. Not aggressive, not timid, patient. The knock of a man who knew the door would open because doors always opened for him. It was a Thursday afternoon, November. The trees on Maple Drive had dropped most of their leaves, and the street smelled like wet pavement in someone's fireplace. Ji-hoon stood on the porch in a charcoal overcoat over a black suit, hands clasped in front of him, breath making small clouds in the cold air. Behind him, a black sedan with tinted windows idled at the curb. Dae-jung sat inside, watching. The door opened on the second knock, not the third. Diane Mercer wore a cream blouse and gray slacks and a thin gold necklace with a cross pendant. Blonde bob freshly styled, makeup precise. She looked exactly like what she wanted the world to see. A respectable woman. A woman of faith. She smiled the way she always smiled. Automatic. Practiced. The smile that had disarmed police officers and pastors and social workers and 12 women eating lemon bars every Wednesday. Ji-hoon didn't smile back. And in the half-second it took Diane to register that her smile had landed on something it couldn't penetrate. Something shifted in her eyes. A recalculation. Quick. Almost invisible. But Ji-hoon caught it, the way a hawk catches movement in tall grass. "I'm here regarding your late husband's construction debts," he said. The smile faltered, just barely, the way a light flickers when the wiring is bad. Most people wouldn't have caught it. Ji-hoon caught it, the way a hawk catches movement in tall grass. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I believe you do." He stepped inside without asking permission. Not aggressively, not pushing past her. He simply moved forward with the kind of certainty that makes people step backward without thinking about it. Diane stepped backward. Her hand was still on the doorknob. Her smile was still trying to reassemble itself. Behind Ji-hoon, his associate entered and closed the front door. The lock clicked. The sound was small and final. The house was exactly what the footage had shown. Clean, bright, Bible verse on the wall, fresh flowers, scented candles. Ji-hoon's eyes moved through the room like a building inspector's. Structural assessment. Points of failure. Then he saw her. Zara stood in the kitchen doorway. Smaller than the footage suggested. Thinner. The oversized gray sweatshirt hung off her frame like a curtain on a narrow rod. Hair pulled into the tight bun. Eyes brown and large and holding the stillness of someone who had learned that movement attracted attention, and attention attracted pain. Ji-hoon registered everything in 2 seconds. The tremor in her fingers on the doorframe, shoulders curved inward, dark circles under her eyes. The way her gaze moved to Diane first, always to Diane first, checking the weather of the room before deciding whether to exist in it. He did not look at Diane when he spoke. "You can leave the room," he said. His voice was level and quiet and directed at Diane without turning his head. Diane laughed, short, performative. The laugh of a woman trying to regain control of a scene that had slipped away. "This is my house." Ji-hoon's associate shifted his weight near the door. The movement was subtle, the message was not. Diane stopped talking. She leaned against the kitchen counter with her arms crossed, chin lifted, performing control she no longer had. Everyone in the room knew it. Ji-hoon turned back to Zara. He stood 10 feet away and spoke in a voice that was not soft and not hard. It was steady. The way ground is steady beneath feet that have forgotten what solid feels like. "Are you sick?" he asked. Zara didn't answer. Her eyes moved to Diane. Diane interjected, "She has anxiety. She's been struggling since her father passed." Ji-hoon didn't blink. Didn't shift his gaze. "I didn't ask you." Silence, pressurized. The kind that builds before something breaks. Ji-hoon held eye contact with Zara. Not forceful, not demanding, steady. He stood the way a man stands when he has nowhere else to be and nothing more important than waiting for a 19-year-old girl to decide whether the world contained one person who would listen. "You don't have to protect her," he said. Something inside Zara cracked. Not broke. Cracked. The way ice cracks when warm water touches it. The way a wall cracks when the foundation shifts. Her fingers tightened on the doorframe. Her eyes filled but did not spill. She looked at this stranger in a charcoal coat, standing in her dead father's kitchen, and felt something she hadn't felt in 2 years. The possibility that someone might believe her. She didn't speak. not yet. But she didn't look away, and that was enough. For now, that was enough. Ji-hoon turned to Diane, unhurried, deliberate. "We'll be in touch regarding the construction accounts. I'd recommend you don't travel." It wasn't a threat, it was a fact. Diane's face cycled through confusion, calculation, and fear in 2 seconds. The fear won. She hid it behind a tight smile, but her knuckles whitened on the counter behind her. Ji-hoon walked toward the front door. As he passed Zara, he slowed. Just enough for her to hear. "This isn't over." He didn't look at her when he said it. The words were not for Diane. They were for the girl who had spent 2 years being told no one would believe her. Then he was gone. The sedan pulled away. Maple Drive returned to its quiet stillness. Inside the house, Diane locked every door. Checked every window. Her hands trembled with a vibration Zara had never seen before. The body language of a woman who had just met something her system couldn't absorb. She paced the living room. She picked up her phone, put it down, picked it up again. She pulled the curtain back and stared at the empty curb where the sedan had been. Then she turned to Zara. "If anyone asks, no one was here today." Zara looked at her stepmother. For 2 years, that face had been the ceiling of her world. The final authority. The source of every lie that kept her caged. But something was different now. A hairline fracture in the foundation. Because a man had stood in this kitchen and said, "I didn't ask you," to the woman who controlled everything. And for the first time, Diane had gone silent. "Do you understand me?" Diane's voice was harder now. But beneath the hardness, Zara heard something new, something Diane had never let slip before. Panic. "Yes," Zara said. But for the first time in 2 years, the word meant nothing. Just sound. Just performance. Because behind it, Zara was holding 3 words against her chest like a coal breathed back to life. This isn't over. Someone had come. Someone had looked at Diane and hadn't believed her. Someone had looked at Zara and seen what was really there. She didn't know his name. She didn't know if he would come back. But the cage had a crack in it. And cracks, once they start, don't stop. That night, Diane didn't prepare a plate. No card table, no gravy bowl, no bread roll. She stayed in her bedroom, with the door closed and the television on loud. And Zara lay in her own locked room, with an empty stomach and a full heart, listening to the quiet hum of something she had almost forgotten existed. Hope. Fragile, dangerous, unreliable, but alive. Chapter 7. Ji-hoon came back on a Monday, not because Monday was strategic, because the lab results had arrived on Saturday and he had spent Sunday sitting in the back office of the restaurant staring at a single sheet of paper that said arsenic in clinical font, and by Monday morning, the stillness inside him had hardened into something that didn't have a name, but had a direction. He brought 2 things: a small clear evidence bag containing the lab report, and Dae-jung, who waited in the sedan with the engine running, and a phone ready to make a call that would end Diane Mercer's performance, permanently. This time, he didn't knock. The front door was unlocked. Monday was Diane's errand day. She went to the bank, the dry cleaner, the post office. A circuit that took 90 minutes. Ji-hoon knew the schedule because he had been watching the footage for 3 weeks, and Diane Mercer was a creature of routine. Routine was control, and control was the only language she spoke. He let himself in. The house was quiet. The kitchen was clean. The fridge padlock hung open, because Diane unlocked it during the day to maintain the illusion of normalcy for Glenn the basement tenant, who sometimes came upstairs for coffee. The Bible verse on the hallway wall caught the morning light. Love bears all things. Ji-hoon found Zara in the kitchen. She was on her knees, scrubbing the floor near the back door with a brush and a bucket of water that smelled like chemicals. Her hands were wrapped in torn rags because the latex gloves had run out a week ago and Diane hadn't replaced them. The skin on her knuckles was cracked and red. Her shoulders moved in a slow rhythm. Forward, back. Forward, back. Mechanical. The rhythm of a body that had been doing the same thing so long, it no longer required a mind to drive it. She didn't hear him come in. Zara. She flinched, hard. The kind of flinch that starts in the spine and radiates outward. A full-body contraction designed to make the body smaller, harder to hit, harder to find. She spun on her knees and pressed her back against the cabinet, the scrub brush held in front of her like it could protect her from anything. Then she saw who it was. Not Diane. The man from last week. The one in the charcoal coat who had said, "I didn't ask you," and made Diane go silent. The one who had looked at her like she was a person and not a problem. The one who had said, "This isn't over," and left her holding 3 words in a house that had given her nothing to hold for 2 years. Her grip on the brush loosened, but she didn't drop it. Trust isn't a light switch. It doesn't flip on because someone says the right thing once. Trust is a staircase, and Zara was standing at the bottom, looking up, trying to decide if the first step would hold her weight. "She's not here," Zara said. Her voice was low, rough at the edges. The voice of someone who hadn't used it for anything other than yes and no and "I'm sorry" in months. "I know," Ji-hoon said. "That's why I came. Now." He didn't move closer. He stood in the kitchen doorway, the same spot where Zara had stood last Thursday. And he let the distance between them remain exactly what it was. 10 feet. An ocean. A choice. "I need to tell you something," he said. "And I need you to hear it before she comes back." Zara's fingers tightened on the brush again. Her body was doing what it had learned to do. Brace. Prepare. Expect the worst. Because in this house, information was never a gift. It was always a weapon. Ji-hoon reached into his coat and pulled out the evidence bag. He held it at his side, visible but not extended, not pushing it on her. "You're not sick," he said. "Not the way she told you." Zara's brow creased, a small line between her eyebrows that deepened with confusion. "Your stepmother has been poisoning you." The word dropped into the kitchen like a stone into still water. It landed. It sank. And then the ripples started. Zara didn't move, didn't breathe. Her eyes locked on Ji-hoon's face, searching for the tell, the crack, the sign that this was a lie, or a trick, or another version of the game that everyone in her life had been playing. She had been lied to by her stepmother, lied to by her doctor, lied to by her pastor, her neighbors, her social worker, and 12 women eating lemon bars in her living room. Why should this man be any different? But his face didn't crack. His eyes didn't shift. He stood in the doorway with the evidence bag at his side, and he waited the way a man waits when he knows the truth is heavy and the person receiving it needs time to find the ground beneath their feet. "The gravy," Zara whispered. It wasn't a question. It was recognition. The body knowing before the mind catches up, the stomach turning every time she ate from the bowl. The instinct she had felt in the dark after Diane found the breadcrumbs. The knowing she couldn't name. Ji-hoon nodded once. "Arsenic. Low dose. Over months. Your hair loss, the tremors, the fatigue, the nausea. All of it." Zara's hands started shaking. Not the tremor she had grown used to. A different kind. The The kind that comes when the body finally understands what has been done to it, and the muscles don't know whether to fight or collapse. She says I'm crazy, Zara said. The words came out cracked and thin, like paper held over a flame. She says it's grief. She says I'm broken. Ji-hoon's jaw tightened. The scar on his chin caught the kitchen light. Do you believe her? He asked. The question landed the way a hand lands on a shoulder when someone is falling. Not pushing, steadying, offering a point of contact in a world that had pulled every support away. Zara looked at this man, this stranger who had walked into her kitchen and told her the truth when every other person in her life had chosen the lie. Her father's doctor had chosen the lie. Her pastor had chosen the lie. Her neighbors, the social worker, the police officer, 12 women with lemon bars, all of them had looked at Diane Mercer and chosen the comfortable story over the ugly truth. This man had chosen different. She shook her head. No. The word was small, but it was the largest thing she had said in 2 years. Because no meant, I'm not broken. No meant, I know what she did. No meant, the cage is real, but I am not the reason it exists. No meant, every lie Diane had planted was a seed that would never take root again, because the soil had changed. Because the girl kneeling on the kitchen floor with cracked hands and poison in her blood had finally heard someone say the one thing no one else had been willing to say. You didn't deserve that. Ji-hoon held the evidence bag up. The lab report was visible through the plastic. Numbers, chemical formulas, the clinical language of proof. This is what she's been putting in your food. This is what's making you sick. And this is what's going to put her in prison. Zara's breathing fractured. 2 years of silence collapsed inward like a building that had been standing on nothing but pressure. Her eyes spilled over. Not loud crying, not dramatic. The quiet kind. The kind that comes from a place so deep, it doesn't make sound. Tears running down cheeks that were too thin and falling onto hands that were cracked from bleach and shaking from poison. You didn't deserve that, Ji-hoon said. 4 words, and for the first time since her father died, Zara felt seen by someone who wasn't trying to use her. Diane came home at 11:42. Ji-hoon was sitting at her dining table. Her dining table. The oak one Curtis built. The one with the cloth napkins and the candles and the placemat covering the scratch Zara had made when she was 6. He sat in Diane's chair, his coat folded over the back, his hands clasped on the table. The evidence bag beside his right hand like a place setting. Zara was sitting at the table too. Not the card table. Not the fold-out by the back door. The real table. For the first time in 2 years, she was sitting where her father used to sit. In the chair with the small nick on the armrest where Curtis used to tap his wedding ring while he talked. Diane walked through the front door, carrying a dry cleaning bag and a paper sack from the bakery. She was humming. She stopped humming when she saw the kitchen. Her eyes went to Ji-hoon first, then to Zara at the table, then to the evidence bag, then back to Ji-hoon. Her brain was running calculations that her face hadn't caught up with yet. What is this? She said. The dry cleaning bag rustled in her grip. Sit down, Ji-hoon said. This is my house. You said that last time. Sit down. Diane didn't sit. She put the dry cleaning bag on the counter slowly, buying time. Her eyes kept moving. To the windows, to the front door, to her phone in her purse on the hook by the entrance. I'm calling the police, she said. I'd recommend it, Ji-hoon replied. They'll want to see the lab results. That stopped her. Not the words, the tone. The absolute absence of bluff in his voice.
Diane Mercer had spent her entire adult life reading people, manipulating their pressure points, knowing exactly which lever to pull and when to pull it. She could read weakness from across a room. She could smell fear through a closed door. She couldn't read Ji-hoon. And that terrified her more than the evidence bag. "You're poisoning her," Ji-hoon said. He didn't raise his voice. He stated it the way a person states the weather. Clear sky, cold front. Arsenic in the gravy. That's insane, Diane's voice cracked for the first time. Not dramatically.
Just a hairline fracture in the porcelain. She's mentally ill. I've been caring for her. I have records. I have medical documentation. I have witnesses. You have a care log. Ji-hoon's eyes didn't leave her face. A journal in the kitchen drawer where you document every dropped plate and every raised voice. You have a police report filed by an officer with gambling debts connected to your lawyer's cousin. You have a pastor whose donations spike every time someone gets close to asking the right questions. And you have a social worker who visited once and checked boxes for 40 minutes. Diane's face lost color, not slowly, all at once, like a screen going dark. Her fingers pressed into the marble counter so hard the tips went white. How do you... I also have testimony from Glenn, your basement tenant, the one who pays cash, the one who heard you through the floor every night. He's been very cooperative. That was the moment Diane understood that the man sitting at her dining table had not stumbled into this house by accident. He had excavated it, layer by layer, brick by brick. He had taken apart the architecture she spent 2 years building, with the same patience she had used to build it. That's your architecture, Ji-hoon continued. That's what you built. A reputation shield. Very thorough, very patient. The kind of planning that takes years and works perfectly as long as nobody checks the foundation. He tapped the evidence bag. I checked the foundation. Silence. The kind of silence that follows a detonation. Not the absence of sound, but the shock before the sound registers. Diane stood behind the counter with her hands flat on the marble, fingers spread like a woman trying to hold the surface of the earth still while it shifted beneath her. "Who are you?" she whispered. Ji-hoon didn't answer the question. He didn't need to. The answer wouldn't have helped her. "You're going to pack a bag," he said. "For what?" "First, the hospital. Because you're going to watch the doctors confirm what's in this report while they treat the girl you've been poisoning for 6 months. And after that?" He leaned forward slightly, not aggressively, the way candlelight leans toward a draft. "After that, you're going to prison." Diane's performance collapsed. Not slowly, not gracefully, not with the measured control she had maintained for 2 years. It collapsed the way a wall collapses when you remove the one brick that was holding everything in place. Her face contorted. Her hands curled into fists. The mask she had worn to church and charity drives and Bible study and every interaction with every human being who had ever called her a blessing fell away. And beneath it was something Zara had always seen but could never prove. Rage. Raw and exposed and ugly. "You don't know what she's like," Diane hissed, pointing at Zara. "You don't know what I've had to deal with. She's a burden. She's been a burden since the day I walked into this house. I gave up everything for her." "You gave up nothing," Ji-hoon said. "You took the house, the insurance, the benefits, her identity, her health. You took everything her father left her, and you're trying to take the one thing you can't forge paperwork for, her life." Diane's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Zara sat at the table. She hadn't moved. She hadn't spoken. But something in her posture had changed. Her shoulders were no longer curved inward. Her hands were flat on the table, not gripping, not shaking. She was sitting up straight in her father's chair and looking at her stepmother with eyes that had been cleared of 2 years of fog. Not anger. Not yet. Something older and quieter. Clarity. She could see Diane now, fully, without the filter of fear, without the distortion of isolation, without the constant low hum of gaslighting that had made her question her own body and mind every single day for 2 years. She could see the woman who had married her father for a house and an insurance policy, and then tried to erase the daughter who came with it. And for the first time, Diane could see that Zara could see her. The look in Zara's eyes was not hatred, it was recognition. The steady, clear gaze of a girl who had been told she was broken every day, and had finally stopped believing it. That was what broke Diane. Not the evidence, not Ji-hoon, not the threat of prison. The look. Because Diane's power had never been physical. It had been perceptual. She controlled how the world saw Zara, and through that, she controlled how Zara saw herself. And now that control was gone, evaporated, burned away by 4 words from a stranger and a lab report in a plastic bag. Diane's hands gripped the counter behind her, her knees locked. Her mouth worked silently, trying to find the next performance, the next mask, the next version of herself that could survive this room. But the closet was empty. Every mask had been tried and discarded. Every lie had been told and disassembled. For the first time in her adult life, Diane Mercer had nothing left to perform. Diane tried the law card. "I'll call the police." "They're already outside," Ji-hoon replied, calm as morning. She lunged for her phone. Ji-hoon didn't move. He didn't need to. The phone call she wanted to make was to Officer Kemper. But Kemper wasn't going to answer. Not today. Because at 9:30 that morning, while Diane was at the dry cleaner, an anonymous package had arrived at the Westbrook Police Department's Internal Affairs Division. The package contained financial records showing Kemper's gambling debts, his connection to Diane's lawyer's cousin, and a timeline correlating his debt payments with dates of his reports involving the Mercer household. Kemper was sitting in an interview room right now, answering questions he didn't have good answers for. He had tried the usual deflections: routine call, standard assessment. The girl appeared agitated, the stepmother appeared composed. But the internal affairs investigators had the financial records now. And financial records don't accept deflections. They asked him about the gambling debts. They asked him about Vince Gaeta's bar on Cicero Avenue. They asked him about the timing of the domestic disturbance report, and whether he had conducted any follow-up with Zara directly, without Diane present. He had not. They asked him why. He didn't have an answer that sounded like anything other than what it was. Complicity, dressed in laziness, dressed in a uniform that was supposed to mean something. The anonymous tip to Westbrook PD had come with something else. Lab results showing arsenic residue recovered from the kitchen plumbing of 414 Maple Drive. Financial records showing Diane's manipulation of Curtis Thompson's death benefits and survivor payments. Documentation of the forged homeschool declaration. And a detailed timeline of Diane's donations to Grace Fellowship Church, cross-referenced with dates when complaints or inquiries about Zara's welfare had been made. Ji-hoon had not provided this evidence personally. He couldn't. A Mafia boss handing evidence to the police was a complication he didn't need. Instead, Dae-jung had assembled the package and routed it through a chain of contacts that ended with a concerned citizen who wished to remain anonymous. The chain was clean, the evidence was real, and the Westbrook Police Department, faced with a poisoning case and a corrupt officer and a paper trail that led in every direction Diane didn't want anyone looking, had no choice but to act. A squad car pulled into the driveway at 11:58, 16 minutes after Diane had come home. 2 officers. Neither of them was Kemper. Diane saw the car through the window. The color left her face again, but this time it didn't come back. "This is a mistake," she said. Her voice had lost its performance quality. It was flat now, stripped. The voice of a woman watching her architecture collapse in real time,
and running out of bricks to throw at the cracks. "This is a consequence," Ji-hoon said. The officers knocked. Ji-hoon's associate opened the door. The officers entered with the careful, measured posture of people who had been briefed on what they were walking into. One of them looked at Diane. The other looked at Zara. The one who looked at Zara saw the same thing Ji-hoon had seen: the thinning hair, the trembling hands, the hollowed cheeks. The body of a girl who had been taken apart over months by someone who was supposed to take care of her. They asked Diane to come with them. She refused. She demanded to see a warrant. She threatened to call her lawyer. She invoked her rights as a homeowner, as a taxpayer, as a member of Grace Fellowship Church. She called Pastor Holloway's name like an incantation, as if the man who had praised her from the pulpit could walk through the walls and make this stop. The officers explained that they had probable cause based on the lab results and the financial documentation. They explained that she could come voluntarily or they could arrest her. They explained this calmly, the way people explain things to someone who is not listening and will not remember. Diane chose voluntary. Because even now, even with her system crumbling around her, she was performing. Voluntary looked better than handcuffs. Voluntary preserved the narrative she was already building in her head. A misunderstanding. A jealous girl. A vindictive stranger. She would explain it all at the station. She reached for her purse. Her car keys. Her phone. Ji-hoon stood. "Leave the lockbox key." Diane froze. "What?" "The lockbox in your bedroom closet. The one with Zara's birth certificate and social security card. Leave the key." The specificity of the request shattered something in Diane's expression. Not because the request was unreasonable, because it meant he knew. He knew about the lockbox. He knew about the documents. He knew the exact mechanism by which she had kept Zara trapped. And if he knew that, then he knew everything. Every lie, every brick, every thread in the web she had spent 2 years weaving. She put the key on the counter. As the officers escorted her toward the front door, she passed Zara. She stopped. Her face twisted into something that wasn't a smile and wasn't a snarl, but lived in the space between. "You'll crawl back," she hissed. "You have nothing. You are nothing. You'll crawl back to this house and beg me." Zara flinched. The old flinch, the one that started in the spine. 2 years of conditioning doesn't disappear because the truth arrives. The body remembers what the mind is trying to forget. Ji-hoon stepped forward, not aggressively, just enough to break the line of sight between Diane and Zara. His body blocked the view, his shoulders squared. He didn't touch Diane. He didn't need to. "She won't," he said. It wasn't loud, it was final. The way a door sounds when it closes for the last time. The way a lock sounds when you know it won't open again. The officers led Diane out. The squad car doors closed, the engine started. The car pulled down Maple Drive and turned the corner and disappeared behind the row of trees. Zara watched from the kitchen window. She watched the way she had watched everything for 2 years. Quiet, still, observant. But this time, the watching felt different. This time, she wasn't watching danger arrive. She was watching it leave. The house was quiet. For the first time in 2 years, the silence didn't mean danger. It didn't mean someone was watching. It didn't mean a timer was about to go off, or a door was about to lock, or a woman was about to stand in a doorway and whisper the word broken until it became true. The silence just meant silence. And silence, when it isn't weaponized, is one of the gentlest sounds in the world. Zara stood in the kitchen, her hands were still shaking, her body was still weak. The arsenic was still in her system, and the bruises were still on her skin, and the bald patches were still hidden under the bun. But the padlock was hanging open on the fridge. And the bolt lock on her bedroom door had no one left to turn it. And the key to the lockbox sat on the counter, small and silver, catching the light.
The hospital room was bright and clean and smelled like antiseptic, and something else Zara couldn't identify. Something neutral. Something that wasn't bleach, or gravy, or vanilla-scented candles, or any of the smells that had defined her world for 2 years. The doctor was a woman named Dr. Adeze Okonkwo, mid-40s, short natural hair, calm hands. She confirmed what the lab report said. Chronic arsenic poisoning. Hair loss from toxic alopecia, neurological tremors, organ stress on the kidneys and liver. White lines on the fingernails. Mace's lines. The body's way of recording the timeline of its own poisoning. Treatable, because it was caught in time. Zara sat in the bed with an IV in her arm and a thin blue hospital blanket pulled to her chest. The blanket was the warmest thing she had felt in months. Not because of the fabric, because someone had given it to her without asking for anything in return. Ji-hoon stood by the window. He had driven her himself. Not in the black sedan, in a gray car Dae-jung pulled from a parking structure. Because Ji-hoon understood that a girl trapped in a house for 2 years might not be ready for tinted windows. He had thought about that. The car, the optics. With the same precision he brought to everything. He stood by the window with his hands in his pockets, looking at the parking lot below. He hadn't spoken since the doctor finished. He was giving Zara space. Not because she was fragile, because she had been caged. And the first thing a caged creature needs when the door opens is room. "You don't have to stay," Zara said. Her voice was quiet but clearer than it had been in the kitchen. The IV was already doing something. Fluids. Nutrients. The first clean sustenance her body had received in months. "I know," Ji-hoon said. "Why are you?" The question hung in the hospital room. Outside, a siren passed on the street below. A nurse's shoes squeaked on the hallway floor. The IV drip counted seconds in clear liquid drops. Ji-hoon took a long time to answer. Not because he didn't know. Because the answer lived in a place he didn't visit often, and the door to that place was heavy. "My sister asked for help once," he said. Zara waited. "I wasn't there." 6 words containing 10 years of guilt and grief and the particular kind of rage that doesn't burn hot but burns constant. Soo-yeon, the girl with wind chime laughter and a sketchbook and a world that told her she was imagining it. He didn't say her name. He didn't need to. The shape of the loss was in his voice, in the set of his jaw, in the way his hands pressed deeper into his coat pockets, as if holding something that could never be held. Zara swallowed. The IV line shifted against her arm. "You're here now," she said. Ji-hoon nodded once. A small movement. The kind of nod that means more than 1,000 words, because it comes from a man who measures every gesture the way an architect measures load-bearing walls. They stayed like that. Zara in the bed, Ji-hoon by the window. No words, no promises. Just 2 people sharing the kind of silence that only happens when both understand what it means to be failed by the world and still be standing. The weeks that followed moved at the speed of healing. Zara stayed in the hospital for 9 days. Chelation therapy pulled the arsenic from her system slowly, painfully, with setbacks. Her body fought the treatment on the 2nd day, and she vomited for 6 hours while nurses adjusted her medications. Ji-hoon sat in the hallway outside her room, not inside, because she had asked for privacy, and he gave it without question. He brought Korean food on the 3rd day. Soft tofu stew and rice porridge from the restaurant on West Lawrence. Set the containers on the bedside table without ceremony. "You don't have to eat it," he said. She ate all of it. The first meal in over a year she finished without fear, without checking the clock, without wondering what was in it. On the 5th day, her hair stopped falling out. On the 7th, her hands stopped shaking. On the 9th, she walked out under her own power. Diane Mercer was awaiting trial. The charges were extensive: attempted murder through chronic poisoning, financial fraud, identity theft, forgery, unlawful restraint. The evidence was overwhelming. Kemper's testimony, given in exchange for a reduced sentence, filled in the gaps. Even Glenn confirmed hearing Diane speak to Zara in ways that made him close his door and turn up the television. Pastor Holloway resigned 3 days after the arrest. No public statement, no apology. He simply stopped showing up, and the congregation began the slow process of reckoning with how many lemon bars they had eaten while a girl cleaned bathrooms above their heads. Kemper was suspended, the social worker placed on review. The school counselor resigned. Mrs. Calloway left a casserole on the porch of 414 Maple Drive with a note that said, "I'm sorry, I didn't ask again." Zara put the note in the kitchen drawer where Diane's care log used to be. She didn't throw it away. She didn't write back. Because forgiveness is a door you open 1 inch at a time, and some doors take longer than others. The house was hers now. Lawyers were working through the details, but Curtis's original will left everything to Zara. The process would take months, but the locks had been changed, and she slept with her bedroom door open for the first time in 2 years. Open. Because open meant she could leave whenever she wanted. Jihoon stood beside his black sedan on a Tuesday in December. First snow of the season falling in thin flakes that melted on the pavement. Zara walked down the steps of 414 Maple Drive wearing a coat that fit. Not an oversized sweatshirt. A coat she bought herself with money from an account she opened using her own social security card and birth certificate, retrieved from the lockbox with the key Diane left on the counter. She looked different. Not healed. Healing. There is a difference. Healed is a destination. Healing is a direction. Her hair was growing back in soft new coils. Her cheeks had color. Her hands were still. "You're free," Jihoon said. The word landed differently than it would have 3 months ago. Then, freedom was abstract, something behind a locked door. Now it was this: a Tuesday, snow, a coat that fit, an open door behind her, and a world she could walk into as she chose. "What happens to people who hurt others like that?" she asked. Jihoon's expression didn't change. The scar on his jaw caught the gray winter light. "They learn," he said. He opened the car door for her, not as possession, not as a transaction. He opened it the way a person opens a door for someone who has spent too long in a room with no exits. Zara looked at him, at the car. At the house on Maple Drive, behind her, the house her mother chose. The house that became a prison and was now becoming hers again. She got in. And somewhere inside Jihoon Kang, the man who ran an empire on silence and precision, a wound he had carried for 10 years, closed. Not all the way. Wounds like that never close all the way. But enough to let the old grief breathe, enough to know that this time, he had been there when it mattered. The sedan pulled away. Maple Drive disappeared behind them, and Zara Thompson, 19 years old, alive, unbroken, pressed her forehead against the cold window and watched the snow fall on a world she was seeing for the first time. Not because it was new, because she was. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story. Share your thoughts in the comments and inspire others, because somewhere out there, someone is watching this, and they needed to hear that the cage doesn't last forever, that someone comes, that the lock breaks, that the girl who was told she was broken was never the one who was broken at all.